I'm really grateful to be here today to spend some time with you, to share some time with you, and to share some information that is reflective of the work that we've been doing, that has been happening, and how we've been engaging with our families and within our young people. I really love and appreciate times when we get to come together like this. When we get to come together like this and have these conversations where we talk about treaty, where we reassure who we are and where we come from. When we remind each other of who we are and where we come from. And I've always been passionate about treaty. I've always been interested to learn and to know as much as I can, and to hear the different insights, the different perspectives of our people, of our old people. To hear about my relatives, who I'm related to. My relatives all around Indian country. And you know, colonization has really done a number on our people. There used to be millions of our people here. Now I'm related to everybody. And I have to go as far to find a partner. I had to go all the way to Ontario to meet an Anishinaabe Kwe, and to ask her to be my partner if she was willing to walk through life with me. She was reluctant at first, but she gave in. There were so many people on our lands that you could walk through the bush in any direction and not meet a cousin. That's how many people there were here. And in our line of work, when we're talking about treaty, when we're talking about our nations and our governance systems, it all comes down to strengthening our kinship. Strengthening our kinships, our family systems. Looking at what are the blocks that are preventing our healthy families from coming together so that our communities can be united and harmonious, so that our nations and our governance systems can follow through with what we need to follow through with to affirm our rights in our governance systems, so we can begin to act accordingly and even diplomatically as peoples. What are those blocks? A lot of the work has included working with young people and addressing those blocks within our families. And that's the conversation I would like to have with you today. But before we do that, I want us to honor our bodies, because my line of work has included ensuring that young people stay in their bodies, that we use our bodies and ensure that we stay alive, so that I'm healthy in my mind, I'm healthy in my heart, and I'm healthy in my body. So I want to wake up our bodies. You've been sitting a long time. I'm going to ask you, let's all stand up. Let's all stand up. We'll wake up our bodies. Sometimes it's really uncomfortable to have a body. We're growing, we're aging, and sometimes we're even ashamed of our bodies. And we need to ensure that our young people our children end that legacy of shame of our bodies that has been imposed as a result of colonization, oppression, from residential schools we have all heard and know about. So we want to dismantle that. And how we do that is by stepping outside our comfort zones. So I'm going to make a fool of myself on stage, and I'm going to ask you to join me. So here's what we're going to say. Together, we're going to say this. Repeat after me. We're going to say, adu-bada, 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 badu, adu-bada, 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 badu. Let's say it together. Let's go. Ready? Adu-bada, adu-bada, adu-bada. Beautiful. You sounded marvelous. Okay. Now, when we do this, you're going to stick your thumbs up. So everybody, thumbs up. There we go. Now, when you say do-ba-da, 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 do, you're going to move your body from side to side. Okay? The best you can. Don't injure yourself. Watch your hips. Okay, ready? Thumbs up. Let's go. Do-ba-da, 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 do. Do-ba-da, 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 do. Right on. Give yourself a round of applause. You're doing great. Awesome. Now here's the thing though, some of you weren't really going too much into it. Some of you were doing it just real little. Like you're at the round dance. Really move your bodies when we do this, okay? Thumbs up. Now this time, we're gonna add to our movements. Thumbs up. This time we're gonna bend your knees the best you can. Okay, go easy on the knees. Okay, ready? Do-ba-da, 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 do. Do-ba-da, 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 do. Right on, give yourself a round of applause. There you go. But we're not done yet. Add a bit more. Okay, thumbs up. Bend your knees. This time you're going to stick your butt out the best you can. The best you can. Ready? Do-ba-da, 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 do. Do-ba-da, 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 do. Right on, give yourself a round of applause. Great. But we're not done yet. Hey, you're doing awesome. You're doing great. Thumbs up. Bend your knees, your butt out. This time, you're going to tilt your head back. Ready? Do-ba-da, 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 do. Do-ba-da, 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 do. Right on. Give yourself a round of applause. You did great. But we're not done yet. Really waking up your bodies. Okay, thumbs up, bend your knees, butt out, head back. This time, you can stick your tongue out. Hey! Right on, give yourself a round of applause. You did great. Tap the person on the back next to them, say you did great. Tap the next person beside you, you look marvelous and beautiful. Staying in our bodies, using our bodies, the willingness to step outside our comfort zone is important. It's vital for our growth, our collective growth. There's two mindsets. There's a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. It's the fixed mindset that's often the one that's getting in the way of our collective greatness. It's getting in the way of our communities practicing health and wellness. It's a growth mindset that creates more room and space for collective growth. We need to address the fixed mindset in our families and our communities. When I'm talking about a fixed mindset, I'm talking about, yes, I have characteristics, I have traits, I have abilities and capabilities. But what a fixed mindset does is they invest their time and energy proving to everybody in their family, in their community, that those abilities and capabilities exist. They spend their time proving that they have those. If I spend my time proving my abilities and capabilities, all I'm doing is talking about myself. I'm not leaving room to improve those abilities and capabilities. It's the fixed mindset that says, I don't have to look at myself. I don't have to do my issue work. I don't have to forgive. I've done my healing journey. It's other people who have to do that, but not me. It's you who should go to that wellness conference. It's you who should go to that healing workshop. I don't have to. That's what a fixed mindset thinks. A growth mindset acknowledges that yes, I have capabilities, I have abilities, I have traits, and there's always room to improve on those abilities and traits. There is room for growth, and I'm going to invest my time and energy ensuring that there is growth. I'm going to invest my time and energy improving and growing myself and having the humility to listen and to hear without having to respond of what I know or what I'm already doing. The acknowledgement that yes, maybe I need to hear this in a different way. Maybe this person has to explain it to me for me to understand or for me to get it. It's a growth mindset that's going to strengthen our families and our communities. I talked about colonization. I talked about oppression. And we have to acknowledge that there is still ongoing attempts of colonization. There is ongoing attempts of oppression. And one of my mentors who I looked up to, who I do look up to this day, that explains colonization, is a gentleman, a man named Frantz Fanon. People call him Fanon. He's French. And he narrowed down what colonization is. Now this slide is a little blurry, because when he talks about colonization, he also talks about decolonization. Personally, I don't like the word decolonization. And we hear people say we need to decolonize. If I believe we need to decolonize, that comes from the assumption that we were successfully colonized. When there are still continuous attempts, it's not over. We're not in a post-colonial time. Colonization, it's still happening. There's still attempts to it. We were not fully colonized because we still gather today. We still pray how we pray. Our languages are still here. Our stories are still here. We are still peoples of continuing nations that continue to exist, that will continue to exist. So I need to highlight that because Frantz Fanon talks about decolonization. And this is still applicable because this can still apply to our circumstance and situation as original peoples to this land. Now I'll read it out because this is hard to see. But number one, when we're talking about the liberation of our people, that means the act of freeing a physical territory from a colonizer. And in a way, that means the reclaiming of our land, the reoccupation of our land. And it's our situation here as treaty peoples, as nationals who made treaty. We agreed for peaceful coexistence. And we need to look at, okay, well, my territory Neheo territory, it expands beyond Treaty 6. It expands beyond Saskatchewan and Alberta. It expands beyond the medicine line with our relatives in Rocky Boy in Montana. Neheo territory expands beyond that, and acknowledging that our nationhood and our nations is not limited to our communities. So as Palmaker Cree Nation, we are a community to the Neheo Nation. Samson Cree Nation is a community to the Cree Nation. So what ways, or what possible ways could we set up our young people from Samson and Palmaker to collaborate as a Cree Nation from Frog Lake, from Gehewen, from Monopolis, from Little Pine, Sweetgrass, all communities to the nation. The reoccupation and the resurgence of our collective greatness in reclaiming who we are in our relationship to the land. That's a possibility today. That's a possibility for our children and our young children. The next point that Frantz Fanon makes about the liberation of our people is the act of psychological and non-physical in nature, liberating the colonized consciousness and mentality from the assimilation, pacification, traumas, and conformity due to alienation caused by colonization and colonialism. What that means is practicing a growth mindset. It means the willingness to look at how has intergenerational trauma affected how I relate and connect to children. One of the things I've always advocated for when I've given the opportunity is ensuring there is some kind of engagement for children and young people at these gatherings. And I really commend Samson, your community, for creating the space for young people. That's where I was supposed to be at. Crossing Road for the youth treaty talks. Just simply creating a space for that to happen is important. And I really appreciate that, because if young people are not hearing or being a part of or being engaged in these conversations, this movement isn't going to go anywhere. I always like to see our nations as like a vehicle. And for a vehicle to go anywhere, it needs an engine or it needs a battery. So you have electric vehicles now that need a battery for it to go anywhere. A source of energy for that vehicle to move. Our young people are the source of energy for our nations. If there's no engine, if there's no battery, the vehicle's not going to go anywhere. Our nations are not going to go anywhere. They'll be spinning our wheels. So I'm really grateful that there are opportunities for young people to be a part of these conversations, and we need to continue that. Never in all of our history have we been more at risk to becoming strangers in our own lands. We hear, and you're probably going to hear about in the coming days, of what Canada is continuing to attempt to do when it comes to domesticating us and continuing to redefine us as domestic ethnic minorities instead of original peoples to this land who are of continuing nations and will continue to exist as nations, which is of international stature. Canada likes to minimize and downplay our issues as domestic issues when they are international issues. And we have amazing treaty advocates who can speak to this, who have direct experience to bringing this to light. And I really commend them, our treaty technicians. Some of them are elected officials now. I commend them for the work that they've done, and that they're continuing to do. So the liberation of our peoples includes work from the inside out, practicing that growth mindset. Now there's a model that I like to use that addresses the toxicities that are a result of colonization, that is a result of what we've experienced as families and as communities. And it's called the human drama triangle. I have a question. How many of you have ever been in an argument or a conflict or a fight? Raise your hand. Oh, all of us that way. Yeah, all of us. Probably on Facebook this morning, some of you. We'll go to the next slide. And the human drama triangle by Steve Hartman. I've taken this, we've taken this and we've used it and we modified it to make it our own, to make it applicable to our situation as families and communities. If you were in a conflict, you probably played one of these three roles. You were either a rescuer, a persecutor, or a victim. Let's talk about the persecutor. In any conflict or drama, when I have been a persecutor, I'm often someone who is unaware of my power, and I'm often discounting other people. I'm judging other people. I assume myself as superior over others. And what happens is I'm judging others, I'm paying attention to others, and I'm keeping track of their mistakes, their weaknesses. I'm keeping an inventory of their weaknesses so that I can use those weaknesses against them. A persecutor likes to blame and avoid responsibility of their actions. They'll use their power in a negative way, in a destructive way. A persecutor, inside the world of a persecutor, is weakness and fragility. They don't want the world to see the weakness and fragility. And so they wear a mask of persecution, judging, criticizing, and dominating spaces. They'll bulldoze their way to their own agenda. Persecutors need to be in control at any cost. They'll use psychological manipulation, emotional manipulation, and even physical. They'll be physical. They can be physically violent persecutors. The next one is the rescuer right here. The rescuer has a savior mentality, and they're going to strive to save others. A rescuer assumes responsibility for the happiness of others. They want to make everyone happy. They're going to impose help and do things. They're going to impose themselves on others and do things for others. Even though people are capable of doing it themselves, they'll do it for them. Rescuers will enable unhealthy behavior. They'll enable toxic behavior because it's hard for a rescuer to say no. When somebody asks you for money and you don't have it or you need it for yourself, you'll give it up to them as a rescuer. Even though you need it, it's hard for a rescuer to say no. There can be healthy rescuers, but when it gets unhealthy is when people start to get dependent on them and they start to sacrifice their own needs for other people. And then what happens is they're going to get burnt out. They get tired and they get burnt out. The next one, we're gonna really move through these models real quick, is the victim. When I'm a victim, I'm going to be overwhelmed by life. I'm going to, in my mind, I'm going to have pity me, poor me, Nobody understands me. Nobody cares. I am alone. Victims will isolate themselves. When people love them and care for them, they'll push them away. And victims will create situations and scenarios in their life so that they continue to be victims. A victim needs a persecutor to persecute them, for them to be a victim. A victim needs a rescuer. A victim needs a rescuer in their life to rescue them. What happens in this drama triangle is that we're going to move on it. Some of us are rescuers, some of us are persecutors, some of us are victims. Why I like to talk about this model is because it highlights the band office. How many of you can see yourself on a triangle already? Aside, see yourself. How many of you can see your exes on the triangle? Your exes probably see you on the triangle too, I guarantee you. There is toxicity in our working environments, and we need to address that so that we can become healthy and well. And that means I have to self-reflect and ask, how have I played these games? How have I contributed to toxicity in my relationships or my family or even in my community? We'll move on here. You'll see those little arrows. A persecutor can move to being a rescuer, and a persecutor can move to being a victim, and a rescuer can move to a persecutor and a victim. We can do all of them in a day. It might also depend on the circumstance and situation. Maybe with your exes, you like to be a persecutor or a rescuer or a victim. Maybe with your grandparents, you were a victim or a rescuer or even a persecutor. There is the issue of elder abuse in some of our communities, where young people are persecuting our grandparents and our resource people in our communities. We need to address that. We need to highlight it. And not from a place of judging, criticizing, or even persecuting the people who are persecuting. We have to be empathetic, because our people are still experiencing the impacts of the trauma that we've experienced collectively. It is showing up like this. It's showing up like this with this dynamic in our families. Now here's a key thing with this triangle. If there's no victim, then there's no triangle. If there's no victim, there's no one for the persecutor to persecute. If there's no victim, there's no one for the rescuer to rescue. The only thing the victim needs to do is say no. Enough's enough. Namoya. I'm not going to allow a persecutor to treat me that way. I'm not going to allow a rescuer to be there anymore. I'm going to do it myself. A victim can step inside their power, take responsibility, and follow through with what they need for themselves so that they can accomplish their goals. This is the message we give to children and to young people. When I'm presenting this model to children in kindergarten, they already know. Instead of the persecutor, we'll say bully. Instead of the rescuer, we'll put superhero. And they know what a victim is because they watch superhero cartoons. They get it. They see it in their families. As a parent, as a father, I'll use this model and ask, am I parenting from the triangle? When I was an elected official, I had to ask myself, am I being a councilman from the place of a triangle? And I needed to reevaluate my behavior. I needed to reevaluate my internal world, the emotions that I felt, and the choices I'm making because of those emotions. Now what we've done is we've expanded this triangle, and we came up with a model called the social drama triangle. And that would be the next slide. Sorry, yeah, there it goes. Social drama triangle. Now instead of the persecutor, we put the colonizer, the oppressor, and the behavior is the same. Because the oppressor, like the colonizer, assumes superiority and supremacy. There's often violence or the threat of violence. They blame. A persecutor is often the one that says, well, you should have listened to me and then I wouldn't have hit you. You should have done it my way and then this wouldn't have happened. That's the same thing what the colonizer says and does in the form of their actions. Oftentimes, the persecutor projects their emotional pain. The colonizer does the same thing. They need to be in control by any means necessary. They'll keep an inventory of weaknesses. The colonizer Canada is keeping an inventory of our weaknesses. They know where our communities are at. They know the emotional traumas and the emotional triggers that we have collectively, and they use that to their advantage in their strategies. I was in a meeting back home when I was on council, and the Indian Affairs agent showed up, and they were really trying to push the First Nations Lands Management Act. This was 4 years ago. 6 years ago. And the Indian Affairs agent said, you can sign this today. You don't have to take this to your people. It's going to take too long of a process to explain this to your people. The people elected you here to make decisions on their best interest. You can sign this today. And I had to stick up. I had to address that and said, first of all, you have no business coming to our community and talking to our people in that way. Our people are smart, they're brilliant, and they have the right to know what this is. And they put us here, they put me here to listen to them and to get direction from them. So no, I'm not signing this. And the Indian agent, he didn't like that. He's a Munyao guy. He said, well, if you have a meeting, that's okay. I've talked to communities lots. And a lot of them are going to be upset, but don't worry, sooner or later they're going to give in. That's how Indian Affairs talks at our meetings, and I'm sure there's some of you in here who have experience at those tables. I've heard them talking this way. But our peoples who don't get to sit at those tables in those meetings need to be aware of this dynamic that's happening in our families, in our communities, but it's also happening in the relationship we have with the ones that we're sharing the space with. The colonizers, the settlers. They need to be aware of the dynamic that's at play. So the colonizer assumes themselves superior over others and maintains control by any means necessary. Instead of the rescuer, we have the savior. And the savior is the Munyao person who comes to our communities and believes that they are the exception of all the other settlers, of all the other white people. And there are some really cool saviors. There are some great settler allies in our communities. They're doing the best they can with the resources they have and that they're aware of. But we put that on here because there are some of them who also have white superiority. They're here to save, where they want to save the Indians. They'll go work in our schools. They'll work in our communities, in our ban offices. But the moment you ask them to show up at the hall and say, okay, we need chairs stacked. Can they go stack the chairs? A lot of them get upset because they want to be in the spotlight. They want to be in control. And when that happens, they'll move to being a colonizer Their colonization starts to show up. They impose their help. When you don't need their help, they'll impose it. And there's insincerity in their help. There's often a hidden agenda when they want to help our people. There's something else there. No, I'm not saying all settler allies are like this. However, there is some that are like this from my experience. Another example of a rescuer or a savior in the social drama triangle, in the social scheme of things, are service-based organizations. Service-based organizations need victims for those organizations to exist. Their funding and their money depends on it. And so when we look at the bottom of the triangle, instead of the victims, oftentimes you'll see our own people, indigenous peoples here, original peoples to the land. We'll see them in the form of the victimhood on the bottom of the triangle. We'll see people of color, any person of color will show up in that space. The LGBTQ and Two-Spirit community, people with disabilities, and children. And we start to see this dynamic play out in a form of continued colonization and oppression. Now again, the same thing happens with the human drama triangle. The only thing our people need to say is no. Namoya, we don't need your help. We're going to do and follow through with what we need to do ourselves. We're going to follow through with our self-determination and strengthen our communities from the inside out. We're going to say no, Namoya, to the colonizer. You're no longer going to treat us this way. No, you can't treat our land this way. But here's the thing. When you say no to the persecutor, it exposes their weakness and fragility. When you say no to the colonizer, it exposes their weakness and fragility. And they don't like that. They perceive the word no as an act of violence. And so they respond in the threats of violence or in violence. The land is changing. We are experiencing it. We're seeing it. Our children are going to experience a different land than we know that we grew up with. When we look at Elsie Booktook, the people said no to fracking on their land because it was a sacred space. They said no. And they occupied their land. They said no. But who were the ones who brought the SWAT? Who were the ones who brought the attack dogs? Who were the ones who brought the sniper rifles? It was the colonizer. When you look at Standing Rock, people from all around, maybe some people from here went down to Standing Rock. And people said no. They just said no. Not in this area. Not here. And who were the ones who brought the rifles? Who were the ones who shot the grenades? It was the colonizer. As Indigenous peoples, when we step into the power of our greatness and affirm who we are as nationals who make treaty continuing nations, and we say no, we need to prepare for how that system is going to react. You can predict it. When we had our communities who were saying no to the contribution agreements, what did the colonizer do? Well, they threatened no funding. Some of the communities got no funding. See, the colonizer, they'll make those threats, they'll follow through, they'll manipulate, or they'll give you more money. They'll throw more money or they'll take money away. That's the same behavior as a persecutor. This dynamic, this triangle happens interpersonally in our one-on-one relationships on Facebook, and it happens between nations. When we're able to see the dynamic that's at play, it's going to give me leverage to how am I going to conduct myself? How am I going to conduct myself here? Am I contributing to this, or am I creating space for liberation? Now here's the other thing that happens. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, next one. There we go. Social drama triangle. We're at a time where there is neo-colonialism. So what happens is when oppressed people experience oppression right here, what ends up happening is they start to occupy those systems and those spaces that facilitate that oppression and colonization. So we're seeing our own people working for INAC. We're seeing our own people facilitate the oppression. So oppressed peoples oppress the oppressed. Where oppressed peoples oppress the oppressed. On this side, we see our own indigenous people occupy those service-based organizations, and they start to maintain those systems. A lot of our systems are stressed. And if a person is benefiting from those stress systems, whether it's financially or personally, maybe their ego feels good about it, they're going to be the ones who are going to rationalize, justify, and defend that stress system. They're going to do everything they can to maintain it because they have bills to pay. They bought a mortgage, or they have expensive vehicles. They need that system to exist. And what happens is we start to maintain our own colonization. We start to facilitate our own colonialism. And that's called neo-colonialism, new colonialism, where we're starting to colonize ourselves. We need to be aware of this when we're talking about treaty, because there is a lot of psychological manipulation taking place where our children, I'm not saying here, but in the urban centers and other communities, where children are singing "O Canada" every morning instead of our own flag songs, where children are learning to be proud of being a Canadian instead of a Nehio as an original person to this land. And what happens is because they don't know that, they accept oppression and the ongoing attempts of colonization as normal. That's how it is. We need to move forward. And oftentimes when someone says the need to move forward, they often mean in terms of neo-colonialism. Well, we need to sign the lands management. We need to sign this agreement. We need to go the self-government route. We need to move forward. And what that is, it's neo-colonialism. And it'll lead to the domestication of our nations, where we will be municipalities. We will be domesticated ethnic minorities. When we see people from other countries come here, our relatives from other countries, East Indians, Muslims, they have their language. They have their own spaces to pray. They even have their own organizations. But they are not of continuing nations. They are Canadians. As a Nehio person, you can have your language. You can have your ceremony in your own land base, your own organization, and you can also be a domestic ethnic minority, just like an immigrant who came here. It would be the same. A lot of the language that's being used is along those lines of domestication. We need to be mindful. Young people need to hear this. And we've been explaining it, we've been sharing it, because it's that lateral violence, that toxicity in our families and our organizations that's getting in the way of our collective greatness. These triangles are a fixed mindset. The human drama triangle is a fixed mindset. The social drama triangle is a collective fixed mindset. How do we go about liberating ourselves from this? How many of you can recognize your community or other communities on a social drama triangle? See it happening, even across the land. Yeah, noticing it. Let's look at the next slide, the one that we've been skipping. Now this is the empowerment triangle. Now, I don't like the word empowerment, to be honest. Because even the word empowerment is a reflection of the human drama triangle. If I believe I can empower you, that comes from the assumption that I'm superior. If I believe I can empower you, that comes from the assumption that you are powerless, and I'm the one that's going to grant you power. I like to deconstruct the word empowerment, and we call this the self-empowerment triangle, or the freedom-based triangle, where instead of a victim, when the victim says no, they move up to the creative selves. They take responsibility of themselves, take responsibility of what's going on up here in their mind, their mental health, take responsibility of their heart, of their grief, their broken heart, and they're able to share it, they're able to talk about it. They are willing to be vulnerable and to express themselves. When they open into that creative self, they open into problem solving. And they seek to achieve their goals and solve problems, whatever they face. A community can do the same thing. A community can open into the creative self and harness the collective creativity that exists within our peoples. Because our peoples are smart, they're brilliant. There is an inborn genius that is directly linked to the prayers of our ancestors and the Creator. Our ancestors prayed so hard for us to have what we have, to be where we are. And we can access that. That's always available. Oftentimes, it's that human drama triangle that gets in the way. What a lot of Indigenous people are fighting for and dying for, we already have here as Indigenous peoples. Our rights, our treaty rights, our inherent rights, our land, and our way of life. We have it. We just need to follow through and occupy our space. Occupying our space, and it's the awakening and the reaffirmation of our healthy kinships in our families is going to lead us in that direction. Instead of a persecutor can drop down to being a challenger, where they're going to be assertiveness, and stick up for people who are having a hard time. They can be warrior people who will stand up for our rights, not from a place of judgment, but from a place of empathy. From a place of empathy where I feel anger too. I used to lash out in anger too. I used to be toxic in my masculinity too, and I need to wake up. And you need to wake up too. I can support you. A persecutor can drop down to a challenger and have conversations like this where they can address the toxicity that exists in our families and our communities. To challenge it and say, hey, there is room for growth. We can do better. You can do better. I'm not going to hold you to the labels and judgments that were put on you, that were imposed on you. I'm not going to hold you to your mistakes, because you can grow just like how I've grown. That's what a persecutor can drop into, if they're willing to do it. A rescuer can drop down to being a coach, where instead of imposing and helping other people and doing it for them, they'll support people to do it themselves, where you can practice a growth mindset too. Your community can become healthy and well too, Your organization, your workspace can practice wellness as well. We can overcome toxicity. We can overcome those blocks. And we can do it together. Here's a model that can help us do that. That's what we're showing today. This is everything that the conversation that we're having this afternoon is the reverse triangle. What are the blocks that are preventing our collective greatness? How do we overcome those blocks so that we can facilitate and harness our collective greatness? If you were the rescuer, the persecutor, and the victim in your life, you can also be this creative aspect of self-awareness and harness that creativity and solve problems. You can also be a coach to help and serve others in a mindful growth mindset way. And you can also be a challenger to address these in a healthy way and create the space for growth. Treaty wasn't meant for us to be victims. Treaty didn't make us victims. It was colonialism that imposed and created these shifts in our dynamics. I'm confident that if we move through these toxic dynamics, we grow out of them and apply multi-generational approaches for change. In a few generations, we're going to be a liberated people. If we invest in our young people, in our families, to address these blocks in a healthy way, we'll be a liberated people in a few generations. The problem is, a lot of our people want change in our lifetime. And we jump the gun. We invest in projects that are short-term, always in reactionary mode, reacting to Canada, reacting to the colonizer. The freedom-based triangle gives us space to be proactive so that we can train and prepare young people. When you say no, this is how Canada is going to act. Get ready for that. Have something in place so that we're not reacting to Canada. So we're not reacting to the colonizer, but we're already ready and prepared, and we're being proactive because our children are growing up knowing who they are, knowing where they come from. They're practicing their language. They are praying every day for the multi-generational approach. Multi-generational approach for change. How is this gathering this week going to impact my daughter's children? Is the question I'll ask myself. How is this going to impact the children that are in school today, and their children, and their children? That's a multi-generational approach. I might not see the liberation in my lifetime, and I don't intend to. I want my daughter and her children to experience the fruits of our labor. We can be just as awesome as ancestors, as our ancestors before us. I love you. May all your dreams come true before the revolution. Goodbye. Muistas. Thank you for having me today.
Don't go too far. Thank you very much. Wow, what an inspirational, incredible message that you have. Wow, I was blown away by that presentation. Thank you very much. It was incredible. We have a gift for you. Kevin. I want you to take all your green tickets, take them out. All your green tickets, take them out. Crumple them up in one hand and say, shucks. We're done for today. Oh, wait, it's not done. Whoa, let go.
Let's do something. We wake up our bodies. We've sat down for a long time. I'm going to ask you to find a partner. Person next to you, and just sit knee to knee. Sit face to face to a partner. Everybody in the whole arena, let's do this. Sit knee to knee. Sit face to face. Your knees don't have to touch. No one should be sitting alone. If someone is sitting alone, go sit next to them and say, let's try this out. Let's do this. There you go. Finding a partner, sitting knee to knee. There can only be 2 people with your partners. Okay? Looking around, there shouldn't be anybody alone. There's a gentleman right there with the toque. Someone go sit with him. There he goes. A few people. There you go, person there. Knee to knee. Okay? There we go. All right. Now with your partners, you're going to decide who's going to be partner A and who's going to be partner B. Partner A, you're going to raise your hand so we all know who partner A is. Okay, A's. Everyone's got an A. There's only one A in the alphabet. Okay, A's, put your hand down. B's, you're going to go first. Now, partner B, you're going to repeat after me. And partner A, you're just going to listen to what's going to be said to you. Partner B, you're going to say, good afternoon. It's an honor to be sitting across from you. It's a privilege to be sharing this day with you. I like what I see. You have an awesome smile. You should show it off more often. If you could see what I see, you'd be smiling too. All your friends are lucky to be your friend. I want to be your friend. You're not the mistakes you've made in the past. You're not the labels and judgments that others have given you. You have a life purpose. There's a reason you are here. Our ancestors prayed for you to be here. You have so much to offer. There is greatness inside you. And you can achieve anything. All you have to do is follow through. I believe in you. Life believes in you. I love what I see. I love what I see. I love what I see. Sagi did. Okay, give your partner a high five or a hug because you love them. There we go. And we're going to switch. So partner A, you're going to repeat after me. Partner B, you're going to listen. So partner A, you're going to say, what's up? It's an honor to have spent this day with you. It's a privilege to be sharing this time with you. You have a deadly smile. The world needs your smile. If you could see what I see, you'd feel all tickly inside. I like what I see. All your friends are lucky to be your friend. I'm glad we're friends. You're not the mistakes you've made in the past. You're not the labels and judgments that others have given you. And you can achieve anything. All you have to do is follow through. You have a life purpose. There's a reason you are here. There is greatness inside you. And our ancestors prayed for you to be here. I I love what I see. I love what I see. I love what I see. Isagi did. Thank you, partner. Give them a hug because you love them. Awesome. You go back to your chairs. Thank you for having me. I really want to encourage you, even though you weren't saying those things in your own words, it was still the truth. And it's the truth that's going to liberate our people. It's the truth that's going to liberate our children. It's the truth that has carried us to this day, and it'll carry us onward for coming generations.
Thank you, Colby. Thank you very much, Colby.